This is Voices with Vision on your Jazz and Justice station, WPFW.
We're in the studio joining us right now is Sophia Tesfamariam. I hope I said that right.
Yes.
with the National Union of Eritrean Women, the D.C. chapter, and is the board member for the National Council of Eritrean Americans. And she's also the author of Eritrea, Deconstructing the Commission of Inquiry's report, published in Tesfa News and probably other places. Welcome to Voice of Vision, Sophia.
Thank you, Netfa. Good to be here.
Now, see, this is a lot. We went a little, but we want to unpack a few things because a lot of people are not familiar with what's happening in Eritrea. But suffice it to say, we're having you on as a interlude explanation because right now it's just been announced that we're expected the United Nations Security Council to lift the sanctions that have been imposed on Eritrea since 2008 or 2009. And so we want to unpack why that's happening, to celebrate it, why they were on there in the first place, and some of those other things. Is it possible for you to give us a little brief historical backdrop? Because I think too often when it comes to us understanding current events, people don't really go back far enough. In fact, sometimes they don't go back at all. They just look at what's happening. We want to talk about what led to the formation, if we can start with that, the creation of Eritrea as a nation, that kind of history. Can we do that really quickly?
That's going to be going back.
I know I asked you that last time when you were on, but I think
we'll come back another day for a long history of Eritrea.
It was able to be. It was colonized by Italy at one point, and then fought that independence struggle, and then was attempted to be annexed by Ethiopia, and then through and also with the assistance, from my understanding, of Britain and the imperialist powers trying to help that along, and then that induced the war of independence by Eritrea.
It was a forced armed struggle. It wasn't the choice of the Eritrean people to launch an armed struggle, but it was because of the injustices of the UN, just like we see today, that made the Eritreans have no choice but to fight for a 30-year, very bitter armed struggle, and emerged victorious in 1991 with hopes that the entire region, the Horn of Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia, would finally find this peace for their people and be able to move on. Unfortunately, the policies, the U.S. policies, the Western policies for the Horn of Africa have been so racist, incoherent, and unjust that have caused enmity and sort of rivalries in the Horn of Africa as opposed to peace and integration with the people. And that led to the war with Ethiopia in 1998, very unfortunate border war that cost the lives of thousands on both sides. And finally decided to go to arbitration. To make a long story short, and the final decision on the Eritrea-Ethiopia border was delivered in 2002, the delimitation, and then demarcation was completed in 2007. And ever since then, the Eritreans have been waiting for the United Nations to enforce this decision of the Independent Boundary Commission that it itself set up, and they refused to do that. They were unable to do that. And so the war, the no peace, no war, lingered between Eritrea and Ethiopia for 20 years. And finally, with the change of government in Ethiopia and a more willing partner for peace for Eritrea, the Horn of Africa within a few months has been transformed by Africans themselves, by Eritreans and Ethiopians and Djiboutians and Somalians themselves, without the assistance and interference of any outside forces, and without the blessing of the United Nations that now wants to play a hand in it. So we welcome the peace that we've brought ourselves and take credit for it. Eritreans, Ethiopians have hurdled together and brought this peace. Nobody else brought it for us. And we will work through the issues that we will face in the future, which are going to be insurmountable, as people are still throwing stones and trying to divide these people. But the sanctions are a result of all these countries coming together and saying, there was an injustice in 2009. Eritrea did not interfere in the internal affairs of Somalia. Eritrea did not warrant being punished for voicing its correct policy at that time on Somalia, which now, in hindsight, everybody's looking back and saying, yes, we should have done that in Somalia and maybe saved the lives of millions of people and hardships that Somalia had to endure since 2006. So the sanctions were unjust. They were in violation of the UN Charter itself. They violated Eritrea's sovereign rights on many levels. And yet the Eritreans decided, okay, let's just be in compliance. So the most important thing is Eritrea has been in compliance of these unjust sanctions for 9 years. So we're not asking the UN and the rest of the Security Council to do Eritrea a favor. Mm-hmm. We're trying to salvage their own reputation and their own efficacy and their own credibility and bring an end to this injustice that has been going on for 9 years. And I say, congratulations to somebody at the UN waking up and saying, yes, an injustice has been committed and let's undo it. And, hopefully November 14th is the day that they're supposed to take this vote, that they will vote their conscience and do the right thing for once. And if they are there, as they say, for peace and stability and security in this world, peace and stability and security is coming to the Horn of Africa thanks to the people's hard work and perseverance, and they should let it work and give it a chance.
Mm-hmm. I have to also say, just by their very nature, sanctions are immoral, particularly because the imperialist countries and the Western countries are exempt from them. They're never leveraged against them, while all kinds of real injustices go on here. One is that what we just heard in the segment before this is one example of that such thing. There are political prisoners here. There are all kinds of things that go on here that people have actually gone to the United Nations for an appeal to for various things, the police shooting us down the street, all kind of stuff. But one of the things I wanted that was just my little side comment. And then it's just not, this is the U.S., but we're also talking about the rest of them, which dominate the Security Council of the United Nations. But wanted to go into, because I saw when I first saw this news breaking, incidentally, I was at a rally on the White House talking about the U.S. war against Africans at home in the U.S. In Africa, talking about AFRICOM and everything. But I saw this.
AFRICOM's not in Eritrea.
And so one of the things I saw, which was kind of interesting, I thought you kind of commented or led me to think about it, was John Bolton was being somewhat if not accredited, maybe that's a little bit, but given some sort of form of credit of getting the United Nations to consider lifting these sanctions, when in fact he also, from my understanding and the history back, it was him that was advocating for the putting up of sanctions. So if you can talk about that, and also these accusations, some of the accusations I understand were that they were trying to say, and from my understanding, unable to be corroborated, that Eritrea was supporting Al-Shabaab and other groups they were claiming.
Well, that's just it, while it's all well and good that these sanctions are coming to an end and the world has awakened to the injustices being caused for the last 9 years, what were the charges? What allegations were substantiated ever from day one? From day one that the sanctions were imposed on Eritrea, it was based on unsubstantiated allegations brought by the former Ethiopian regime, its handlers, people who had political interest in advancing this negativity about Eritrea, but really didn't have any substantial evidence. So this monitoring group was established, and I went back and started reading these reports that they were producing from 2005 all the way till today. And it's unimaginable the kind of stuff that they have been putting on about Eritrea in those reports. Flights going through in and out of those borders where, by the way, the U.S. and AFRICOM and everybody else is in that area, and yet Eritreans somehow, these phantom flights manage to go through borders that are not even with Somalia. We don't have any borders with Somalia. And somehow we managed to go there with these truckloads of equipment, and it was just hilarious. And to think that somebody could go to that extent and produce ugly reports on Eritrea just to tarnish a regime that you are not happy with or don't like, to me is sad in this day and age. But thanks to technology and thanks to the internet and thanks to people being able to talk with each other and reach out to each other, we have been able to open up the eyes of the world to some of the injustices that can happen to these countries. What if the Eritrean people didn't stand up against this willful, hostile tactic that was used against the people? What if the rest of us just laid down and said, okay, maybe Eritrea did do something wrong and deserved it, like some countries have been forced to do? But Eritreans stood up and said, no, from day one. From day one, when the sanctions were announced, we came out on the streets of Washington, we came out on the streets of Melbourne, we came out on the streets of Europe and Geneva in unison, in one day. February 22nd is a historical day for Eritreans. Every one of the Eritreans who lived in the diaspora came out and said, this is an injustice against our country and our people, and we will not stand for it. And we have been fighting them tooth and nail, writing about it, raising the issues, illuminating to lawmakers and anybody else that will listen, knocking on doors, telling people this injustice has to end. And they wouldn't listen, but we figured if we brought peace to our region and had our people collectively, Somalians, Djiboutians, Ethiopians, Eritreans, standing up and saying, no more war, no more fighting for your behalf, no more conflicts in our region so that you can have your way in our countries. Right. We've managed to beat the sanctions, and maybe that's the new way to do it, for Africans to come together and speak with one voice. That's what we've done. Yeah,
that's been the way to do it. That's it. I mean, this is a very prime example for the world, particularly for the continent of Africa, what has happened. We hear too much that Africans can't unite and that'll never happen and all that kind of stuff. But you're giving an example of that. They've been able, and I know it wasn't easy. The differences in terms of the borders and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the borders imposed by the Berlin Conference and the other colonial struggles and all these kind of things, and the continued destabilization on the continent by Western powers. These are just excuses they use when they say all these things about human rights. They're really just excuses, and everybody should know that. And so whenever I think it's appropriate for anyone to question whenever the United States claims that there's some country that needs to have, they're so benevolent, like they have moral authority, needs to sanctions and all these things, we should be questioning what's there. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the systems in Eritrea that people don't know a lot about. I mean, there's, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, universal health care, universal education, those kind of things are very underrepresented.
Yes, it's amazing for Eritrea to be such a poor country and be giving 100% free healthcare, free education, all the way to law school, medical school. For every single Eritrean youth, it's unheard of. It's not something that any Western rich countries have been able to do. We certainly don't get our kids here going to college. We're loaded with student loans that are breaking the banks here, and nobody seems to appreciate that. They keep harping about the youth being in national service. The youth are in national service in technical stuff too. They may be in national service, but they're learning in ministries. They're hands-on programs that they're engaged in. They're getting training and rehabilitation. They're getting hands-on know-how in all the sectors of Eritrea that they're working in, and they're contributing to their country. It's an insult and whitewashing of slavery to label Eritrean youth as slaves in their country. A slave, we know what slaves are. You and I know what slaves are. You and I know exactly how slaves were treated. And Eritreans working for their country are not slaves. Eritreans working for their country are citizens with full rights and responsibilities. Something that I wish we could instill in other countries around the world.
So we're going to have you back. We're running, but I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds to say anything, last remarks, or where people can get more information or something.
Well, I think everybody should tweet. Everybody should write to the UN and the Security Council on November 14th and tell them, do the right thing. It's time to do the right thing. 9 years of injustice against the people of Eritrea has to end. And it's an injustice against Eritrea, but today it's an injustice against the entire Horn of Africa. And we need peace. And if the Security Council really wants peace and stability and security, do the right thing, lift the sanctions on November 14th.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. No, I was going to say thanks.
This is Voices with Vision on your Jazz and Justice station, WPFW.